In this series of videos I'm going to be attempting to get this HP9845B computer operational. As you can see, it's in reasonably good condition, a few scuffs and scrapes, but for a machine of this age it's in remarkably good condition. We had a quick look inside in the previous video. I just took the top cover off, hinged the front cover forward, and we had a brief look inside. What we're going to do in this video is strip the system down into its major sub-assemblies. I'm not going to try and power it up until I've been through pretty much all the assemblies, and the reason I'm doing that is this machine does contain some pretty much irreplaceable parts. There are some hybrid modules in here that if they failed it will be extremely difficult to get this working. Luckily the power supply, I described it as kind of pessimistic in the previous video, and what I meant by that was it monitors all the rails. There are quite a few power rails in these machines, and if any are outside spec or if the current on one is too high, the power supply will shut down, which is a good thing. And unfortunately a lot of operators tend not to accept it, and they'll keep turning the power on and off, and that impulse going through the power supply can do a lot of damage to some of the boards. So I don't know if that's the case here. I don't really know what would happen if we tried to power this up, but like I said, I'm not going to try it. There are also some very large reefer style capacitors in the power supply in these, and we all know what that can lead to if we apply power, and especially as I'm in the UK here, so we've got 240 volt mains, and those capacitors do tend to like to explode on a fairly regular basis on machines of this age, so I do need to replace those before we even think of powering it up. Mechanically it doesn't look too bad, but a lot of the parts are kind of sticking, the keys stick down, some of these parts stick as well. I can't rotate the printer, so that might be stuck, but the rubber roller looks to be in fairly good condition, but as I say, some of the keys just stick down. I need to clean off some of this handwriting that's on here. But we'll start by, I'll spin the unit round and we'll take this top cover off. I've already taken the screws out that hold the rear cover and front cover down, so we can now start to remove this. That shouldn't come off as easy as that, so we'll need to bend these tabs back, but luckily no sign of any damage. So we'll get it spun round, take the top cover off, and then look at removing the power supply. So as I said, I've already removed the screws. There are 4 from the underside and 2 that go in from the back. So this will now just lift off. Get that out of the way. And removing the power supply is fairly straightforward. In fact, a lot of the work on these machines is quite straightforward in terms of access. They're quite nicely made from that viewpoint. But what we need to do is remove the screws around the outside of the supply, and then this handle can normally be used to lift the supply vertically upwards. So I'll get the screws out of the way. That's all the screws removed that hold the power supply in. We don't need to remove these smaller ones, it's just the ones around the outside. It's really the ones that have letters against them, and once they're removed there's nothing now holding this in apart from the connectors. So there are 2 edge connectors right at the bottom, and they connect the outgoing power to the rest of the system, and then at the front edge there's a mains input connector. It's like a Molex type connector halfway up the supply. Now when they've been in here for a while they can be quite tight, and in theory we should be able to just lift this out, but I found that what can happen if you just try and pull it directly upwards is it can tilt. As well as the edge connectors, there are also some guides, at least there should be some guides, that help to secure the heatsink. It's quite a clever arrangement on this. It's a bit like a modern heatsink on a microprocessor in a PC, and that there's heatsinks with fins, and the air blows through the fins, and that's what keeps it cool. Now unfortunately, when the filters are missing from the front, we saw in the previous video that the filters are gone, air comes through, it vacuums up all the dust from the bench, and that ends up blocking the inlets to those heat sinks. and that can cause the supply to overheat. It also restricts the airflow through the entire system, so that's often what kills these supplies. It's just you can't really service it very easily. You can remove this, of course, but most people just don't. There's no reason why they would know about it. But when the vents block up, then all bets are off. The supply can fail very quickly. I don't know if that's the case here. This one looks surprisingly clean, so it may have already been cleaned out by the previous owner. We'll have a look and see what's in there, but I found the easiest way of getting these out is to use a short lever. As I say, if you just try and pull up on this, you can twist it and it can damage either the heat sinks or the connectors. So I find the easiest way is just to get a flat bar like this, put it through the handle, and that gives you a lot of control then over trying to lift this out. So what we should now be able to do is just very carefully lift up on this, and it should do that and lift the supply out. And now we can guide it the rest of the way out. It's obviously released from the connectors. We can now pull it all the way out. So we'll get this on the bench, have a look at it in close up. So I'll get the machine out of the way and we'll have a closer look at the supply. So as I said, these supplies are fairly complex, quite interesting to work on in their own right. We've got quite a few rails. We've got plus 17, minus 17, plus 13, ground, 12 volts. We've got logic grounds, and this is really for test. These are obviously for test purposes. We've got plus 5 volts, minus 12, plus 18, plus 7, minus 18. So quite a few different rails, and then in the center here we've got some high voltage DC outlets. And these are quite nice to work on once you get your head around how they work, because they are a bit unusual. So we'll start by looking at them mechanically. So as I said, we have some heat sinks, and that's what these are, and these run down in guides in the main body of the unit, and this is what can jam. So if you rock this when you're trying to get it out, these can jam up and it makes it difficult to get out. You can damage these. You can see they do flap about a bit. There's not a great deal holding these, and if you bend them too hard you can damage the boards or the contacts in the connectors, or you can break them off where they come into the motherboard at the top. But okay, so as we see, we do have some signs here that these are blocked. It's not a good sign. It might mean it's been overheated. I can see light through it, so it may be okay. Like I said, I haven't tried to power this up, but this is what you get when it's these block up completely. Air stops going through, and then the various devices overheat. And this includes the power devices, but also the bridge rectifiers. You can see we have some very large reefer style capacitors. That one is cracked and it's bulging on the back. There's a few of these in here. There's another one in here that's also cracked. That's even worse. That's cracked all the way through. Fuse looks intact, so hopefully that's okay. There's another one at the back there, so we've got another one back here, also cracked. We've got another one on this side, also cracked. So they're all definitely in need of replacements. Once they start cracking, it's only a matter of time, usually fairly short time, before they explode. This is the connector that I was talking about halfway up the supply that engages with the connector on the main chassis. Not too bad in here, bit of dust and dirt, definitely needs cleaning out. But no sign of anything burning up. I'm hoping these two capacitors are okay. They are quite expensive to replace, so I will remove these and test them. So the way I normally go about testing these supplies is I'll remove the boards are all plugged in. So we've got the motherboard at what is the top, upside down, and the other boards just plug into it. So you can just pull these boards out, just remove some have connectors that need to be removed first. And these two connectors are the ones that supply power out of the supply through to the main chassis. But what you can do is apply mains power directly to this connector with this on the bench and not plugged into the main unit. And that's a very easy way to test these. all the boards unplug. You can see they're in edge connectors, and it does make it quite nice and easy to work on. But the first thing I will be doing, of course, is replacing the reefer caps, cleaning all the dirt out of it, testing the bridge rectifiers, all the things that you can test in the normal easy way. I'll test them before I start trying to apply power. And then I'll ramp up the power fairly slowly, and we'll see what happens. But I'll do an entire video on the power supply. So we'll get the unit back and carry on dismantling it. So you can see two of the guides I was talking about. These are for the heat sinks, and the heat sinks just slide down into these. This is the connector I was talking about. I don't know if you can actually see that. It's this connector here, and then we have the two edge connectors at the bottom. The next thing I'm going to take out is this back plane, and there's a big motherboard right at the bottom here. You can't see it yet. It's a fairly similar type of arrangement to what we had in the 9830. Big motherboard at the bottom that all the boards plug into, and again, you can actually take all this out of the chassis, plug everything together and test it with good access to things without all the hardware in the way. So next thing to come out is this back plane, and we'll try to get these out without breaking any of the plastic tabs. So as you can see, they come out fairly easily. Look to be in reasonable condition, just a bit dusty, but that's to be expected. But other than that, it looks fine. You can kind of see how the fans make all the dust collect at the back. Next thing I will do is take out the two clamps that hold the boards in place. So we've got two processors here in effect, one here and one on the other side. So what I'm going to do is take out the clamps. There's one here and then one that runs front to back on the other side. I'll get that out of the way and we can start unplugging the boards. I've got the two clamps removed, and I've got the front of the machine propped up so it doesn't overhang the boards, and we should now be able to just gently ease out each of the boards, again trying to avoid breaking these plastic tabs off. So I will explain what each of these boards does as we come to test them. So I'll now get the clamp out of the way. This is the monitor connector, so there are a couple of screws on the back, two on the front, and then we can remove this and then we should be able to slide this board out. So that's that support plate out of the way, and we should now be able to extract this board. And again, no signs of any physical damage, although there is some corrosion on the edge connector. Not too bad at all. So what I'll do now is I'll spin the machine round and we'll do the same thing on the second side. While we're here, we'll just pop out the ROM drawer, get it spun round, and we'll take the other boards out. So we've got the machine facing the other way, and I've already removed the mounting bracket for the monitor off this side. These incidentally are the modules that I'm talking about, the hybrid modules, and if these are not working then it will be extremely difficult to get this machine resurrected, but fingers crossed they will work. We'll have to check that later. So let's try and get these out. Okay, we'll pop the ROM drawer out of this side as well. And the next thing I'm going to do is take out the printer. So there's just some screws that hold it down to the chassis. Unfortunately, I can't do that with the camera in the way. And then I want to lift this entire assembly out. So what I'm going to do next is remove the printer assembly. Unfortunately, I can't do that with the camera in the way, so I'll have to move you out of the way for a second but I'll get you back as soon as I've got this removed. I've removed the screws that hold the printer down, and this should now just lift out. Let's disconnect the ground strap. I've already unplugged it from the front panel, and that will then come out in one piece, so we'll have a look at this in a future video. And now that's out of the way, what I can do is actually remove the front panel entirely. We've got an edge connector here that will now just unplug. Couldn't get to it before, the printer was in the way. These two connectors are for the two ROM drawers, and then we have another connector here. There's a lot of corrosion on this, which is a bit concerning. We'll have a closer look at that in a future video. What I can now do is take this screw out, this connector will come out, disconnect this, unplug the ground strap, and then I can completely remove the front panel. So I'll do that, get it out of the way. So that's the front panel out of the way. We've got the printer out of the way, all the boards, power supply. The next thing I want to take off is the rear panel. So that's this die-cast metal part on the back. And so just a few screws holding that in place. I'll get this out of the way, and we'll keep the fans attached to it for now. We can come take those off later and test them separately, but we'll remove this intact, and then we can just remove the framework that the boards are attached to, and that will take us down to the motherboard. I've removed the 4 screws that attach this frame to the main chassis. There's 4 on the underside. There are 2 ground straps we need to, or 2 ground screws we need to remove that sit between this and the main motherboard. I can't really show them to you, they're kind of quite difficult to see, but they're down here, so I'll need to unscrew that, and I'll also remove the strap and the screw that hold the mains switch in place, and I can take this all out in one piece. It is still of course attached to this, so we can again take this all out in one piece. It depends really where you want to split it, but I'm going to take this off, we'll get it out of the way, and then we'll be left with just the chassis. So that's the rear panel out of the way. The final step is to remove the last bits and pieces. So you can't take this out as one big piece. I'm actually going to separate it because I want to really clean this up. So I'm going to take the plastic pieces, the frames, off separately, and that's also to minimize the chance of me breaking anything. This is plastic, it's quite brittle, and if it's attached to a big piece of metal, then at some point it's going to end up getting damaged. So I'll take these off separately, just a few screws, some at the bottom, some at the side that hold it to this frame, same at the front, and then we can lift off the 2 card cages independently. So I'll get those out of the way, and then that will just leave us with the metal part of the support. I've removed the 2 supports for the cards. I've also taken out the screws that hold this in place. This should now just lift out, which it does, needs cleaning up, but otherwise it seems in really good condition. A bit more corrosion on this main motherboard than I expected. Hopefully it will clean up okay. I'll look at that once it's been cleaned. I've also taken out the screws that hold the 2 drawers in place. We'll get those out of the way. And so the last thing to do is remove the remaining screws that hold this board in place, and we can then get this out of the way, have a look underneath and see what sort of condition it's in. I think that's all the screws out that hold this down, so we should be able to lift this up, which we can. Clearly it needs a good clean, but otherwise it seems to be in excellent condition. A few of the edge connectors look like the little prongs may have been bent back a bit, so they might need closing up, but it's been surprisingly good condition. Have a look on the other side. And that looks to be in excellent condition, so that's quite a good sign. It means that we've got a good basis for starting the repair. We'll have a look at the chassis. Again, it looks to be in very good condition. Keep hold of that, not quite sure what it is, it might be a serial number. No sign of any cracks or chunks missing, so excellent, very good. So that took about 30 minutes to dismantle, not too many screws. But of course we will need to disassemble each of the sub-assemblies, but that's the first step. Get it all apart, start cleaning it up. We'll start by cleaning up the main motherboard, clean up the chassis, and then we can start refitting all the parts in reverse order and working on each one as we go. Hopefully by the time we get it all put back together it's going to work, and it's certainly one of those machines that's it's worth spending the time and trouble to do it properly. They're very rare, hard to come by, and trying to get them working can be a bit error prone. It's one of these things that if you do make a mistake and accidentally have an issue with the power supply, you can completely permanently destroy them. There's only a few parts in these that are hard to get hold of, but when I say hard to get hold of, I mean pretty much impossible to get hold of. So if you damage them, it's pretty much the end of the life of the machine. So we'll have to be careful and proceed quite carefully, but it should make quite an interesting series of videos.